October 31st has always been my best night. Tonight is the only night you can be someone or something else. Fall has always been my favorite season. I love the cool air, the sound of dry leaves crunching under my feet, and the way the flickering jack-o'-lanterns make scary shadows on every door. My friends and I chose to take things easy this year. It wasn't like we were kids running from house to house to get candy, but we still liked to walk around the area, taking in the creepy vibe. The streets were lined with fake spider webs, plastic skulls, and paper bats hanging from trees. Tony, Rachel, and Kyle were the only ones walking. Kids who were witches, superheroes, or monsters laughed and screamed as they ran around. It was Halloween, and everything felt good. That's when we saw her. She was probably 8 or 9 years old at most, wearing a pale, out-of-date dress like those in black and white pictures from the early 1900s. All the bright superhero costumes and cartoon figures made it look out of place. The skirt of her long, frilly dress touched the tops of her shoes. She also carried a candy bag she had made herself, instead of one that everyone else had bought. It was a dull brown color, and the threads that held it together were uneven. At first, we didn't think much of it. She was just a kid, right? We kept walking through the neighborhood, though, and then we saw something strange. She was always ahead of us. We could always find her just a few houses ahead, waiting for candy by a door with her bag open. It didn't matter which street we took. Her pale dress stood out even more because of the way the porch lights made it shine. Tony said to himself as he watched her from afar, "She's fast. How does she always get ahead of us?" She wasn't really running. She stood still or walked slowly every time we saw her, like she had all the time in the world. It didn't make sense. Without being weird, we chose to follow her to see where she was going. We tried very hard, but we just couldn't catch up. When we got back to the same spot, she would have gone around a corner and be at a different house holding out her bag again. She seemed to be flying through the night, taking no notice of time. Rachel tried to be reasonable and said, "Maybe she's with her parents and they're just out of sight." But there was only the girl in the old dress and no adults around. We kept going. Our eyes were fixed on her. The longer we watched, the worse I felt. It looked like the other kids didn't see her. As they filled their candy bags, they ran past her like she wasn't there. The adults who were giving out candy didn't seem to notice her either. They'd put a piece in her bag, then shut the door and walk away. It was a quick deal, like they were in a hurry to get rid of her. There were no smiles or small talk. "Do you believe she's lost?" Kyle asked softly, like he didn't want an answer. "I don't know," I said, a chill going through me. There was a problem. It was getting less crowded on the streets. People with little kids had already gone home, and the teens and adults were at parties or hanging out somewhere else. The girl in the old dress, on the other hand, was still there and walking around. We went down a street that led to the edge of the area, where homes were spaced out more. The girl was there, standing in front of a house that didn't have any lights on. No one was there when she held out her bag. After a long pause, she turned around and started walking down the street again. The dim light from the streetlights far away made her small figure hard to see. Tony said in a shaky voice, "Let's just go home." Even though things were getting weird, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. "I want to know who she is more than I want to be scared," I said. We kept following her, but we were far enough away that she wouldn't see us, if she could see us at all. Somehow, I felt like we were chasing a shadow, something that didn't belong here. She finally went down a long road on the edge of town, where an old path led to woods that no one used anymore. At the corner, we stopped and watched her walk away into the night. "Are we going to go into the woods with her?" Rachel asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, though I wanted to say yes. A car pulled up next to us before we could decide. We'd seen this old man from the neighborhood a few times before. He rolled down his window and looked at us with eyes that were tired and worried. "You kids shouldn't be out here," he told us. "It's late, and this road isn't safe." "We saw a girl," I said. "That's where she went." The man's eyes widened, his face turning pale. "A girl? Did she have on an old dress?" "Yeah," Kyle said, his voice shaking. "Know her?" The old man let out a sigh and ran his hand over his face. "You won't find her. That girl has been dead for a long time. On Halloween night, there was a car crash on this road. People say they see her sometimes, still trick-or-treating as if she's trying to get home, but her body was never found." We were shocked and silent. our hearts beating fast. "You kids should go home now," he said softly. "You should leave her alone." We didn't argue. We turned around and went back to the neighborhood, spooked. It was no longer the girl in the old dress haunting our thoughts, but the chill of knowing what we'd just encountered. Every Halloween, I wonder if she's still out there, waiting for someone to help her get home. Before we start the next story, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell button to never miss another scary story. We need your help. Tell your family and friends about these stories. Thanks. As a waitress in the early 1990s, I worked at a small diner while going to school for my associate's degree in business. The pay was only $7.25 an hour, and it wasn't the most interesting job. I made some friends and got by. That being said, there was one night I will never forget. That night will always be etched in my mind. It was just another night like any other. Family groups, couples, and regulars were in the diner as usual, and I went about my business. But then something happened that I didn't see coming. A man and a woman who didn't look clean, along with a young girl, walked in. I couldn't put my finger on what it was about them that caught my eye. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. They just seemed out of place. After seating them and giving them menus, I walked away. I saw the girl drop her fork on the floor after a while. It was a small thing, but I went over to get it for her. When I gave it back to her, though, she grabbed my hand a little too hard. It wasn't a simple thing. It felt weird to hold on to her. It was strong, but also shaky. Still, I ignored it. I had other tables to attend to, and it was a busy night. After a short time, I walked by their table again. The girl dropped her fork again. I was more alert this time. I bent down and picked it up. When I handed it back, she squeezed my hand even harder, like she was trying to say something. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to do. What did I know for sure that it meant something? I told myself that maybe she was just scared, but twice more the same thing happened. The girl dropped her fork several times, and each time I picked it up, she grabbed my hand a little tighter. By now, it was clear this wasn't an accident. She meant for it to happen. Her grip made me feel like time was running out, but I still didn't know what was going on. The family finally finished their meal and left. I still felt something was wrong as I watched them leave, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I cleaned up their table after they left. I found a napkin hidden under one of the plates as I was clearing the table. It had writing on it. "Please help me. Call the police." My heart almost stopped. I just looked at the words, my mind racing. I didn't hear what that girl was trying to say the whole time. I took too long to understand and wasn't sure what to do. The thought hit me like a wave of shame and fear. I hadn't done anything to help that girl, but she was in trouble. I thought about her all the time for days. I kept replaying the event, thinking about what I could have done better. The girl had looked a lot like someone I knew, the more I thought about it. I couldn't forget something about her eyes and face. It dawned on me. That face was one I had seen before. Antoinette Cayadito was a girl I had seen on the news who was missing. The girl in the restaurant looked just like her. It had been years since she was last seen or heard from. She was taken from her home when she was 9 years old. As I thought about it, I became more certain that the girl I saw that night was Antoinette. It was an awful realization. Even though I was close to her, I didn't help her. I felt guilty all the time. I might have been able to save her if I'd seen her sooner and done something when she dropped the first fork. There was probably something bad going on with her that I could have stopped. I began to look into her case and find out as much as I could. Penny, Antoinette's mother, has always seemed sketchy to me. She didn't look like a mother who was desperate to find her child. Something about her seemed off, and it made me wonder if she had anything to do with her daughter going missing. Some people even thought Penny had sold Antoinette and was responsible for the tragedy that broke up their family. I'm not sure if that's true, but the thought of it makes me sick. What kind of mother would do that? No one should allow such a terrible thing to happen to their child. It all seemed too horrible to be true the more I thought about it. However, the truth was staring me right in the face. After all those years, I had seen Antoinette alive, but I hadn't done anything to help her. Anthony has never been found. No one knows for sure if she's still alive or dead, but she's still on the list of missing persons. The case has not been solved yet, and all I can do is hope that she is safe and happy wherever she is. I can still remember that night. I think about the girl who grabbed my hand and dropped her fork, trying to tell me something. This took place during my first year at Rutgers University in the spring semester of 2022. I went to Rome, Italy to study abroad. For months I couldn't wait. I thought I'd make friends for life and enjoy the magic of the city. But my time there wasn't at all what I thought it would be like. It was hard for me to make friends, and I didn't really enjoy my studies either. However, what really made Rome so unpleasant for me was something I was about to talk about. It was just another Tuesday. Around 5:30 in the evening, my last class was over. I was tired from being in class all day, and the sun was going down. Like every other day, I took the train back to my flat. I remember just standing there and zoning out while the train rumbled by and the view out the window blurred. 3 stops went by without a hitch. I didn't really pay attention as people got on and off. I just wanted to go home and unwind. When I got off the train at the 4th stop, everything changed right away. I had only gone a few steps when I saw a man coming toward me. At first, he didn't seem very dangerous. He just looked like any other guy in the crowd. But he suddenly appeared in front of me and punched me hard in the groin. I was so shocked and hurt that I couldn't even think about what had happened. He grabbed my wallet out of my pocket, ran off, and I didn't even know it at first. As I tried to catch my breath while still hunched over, my anger grew. He wasn't going to be able to just take my wallet. Even though it hurt, I pushed through and ran after him. There were a lot of people in the station, but I could see him making his way to the exit. He wasn't very fast, which was good because I was quickly catching up. He didn't listen when I told him to stop. I ran faster, closing the gap between us as adrenaline pumped through me. I threw him to the ground when I was right behind him. We went hard down the road. I didn't think twice. I swung my hands around and punched him a few times. My heart was beating fast and I was mad. After taking my wallet back from his pocket, I quickly ran away from the scene. I got back to my room on adrenaline. When I finally shut the door behind me, I felt my whole body relax. I was out of breath, sweating, and still shocked by what had happened. I drank a glass of water quickly and then fell asleep on my bed. Even though my body hurt, I thought the worst was over. To get rid of the stress, I lay down and took a nap. After about 30 minutes, I felt a little better. I woke up and chose to make myself dinner. I kept going over what had happened in my head, wondering if I had been right to chase the guy. Maybe I'd have been better off letting him go, but what was done, and I was just glad to get my wallet back. As I was finishing my dinner, I heard someone banging on my door over and over again. I was shocked, and then I heard someone yelling, "Police!" My heart sank. I had no idea why the cops were at my door. With care, I opened it, and there were 3 cops standing there looking serious. They told me right away that I was going to be arrested for assault and robbery. I was shocked. They wouldn't listen when I tried to explain that I had only been after the person who stole my wallet. I was taken to the police station in a daze after being handcuffed. When I got to the station, I saw the man who had robbed me. A woman I had never seen before was standing next to him. The man pointed at me. "That's the person who attacked my sister," he told the cops. I ran after him, and when I caught up to him, he hurt me. I was speechless. I thought the ground had fallen out from under me. I told the police what had happened, and that I was the one who had been robbed. I didn't know who the woman was. The police seemed skeptical, though. When they asked the woman if the man's story was true, she said yes, which shocked me. I was stunned. I tried to stay calm, but my thoughts were racing. What the heck was going on? After calling my parents, I told them everything. They were as shocked as I was and said they would fly to Rome right away to help me. I was put in a holding cell until my court date 3 days later. 3 days seemed like a very long time. I was so tired that I couldn't even think straight. My parents got there just a few hours before the hearing on the day of the trial. Seeing them made me feel better, but I was still scared of what might happen. I was handcuffed and being taken into court. In the front row, I saw my mother crying. It hurt my heart. I was shocked that this was happening to me. As I sat down at the defendant's table, I saw a witness who looked familiar. The man had been on the train with me the night I was robbed. At the start of the trial, the woman stuck to her story, saying I had followed her home, broken in, and beaten her. She said her brother had caught me, and that I hit him when he tried to stop me. It terrified me to hear her lie so confidently. When it was my turn to talk, I told the court everything that had happened. I was scared no one would believe me. Then the witness spoke. The judge listened as he said he saw the whole thing. He said that I had been robbed on the train and chased the thief to get my wallet back. His testimony eased my fear. After what seemed like hours of deliberation, the judge finally made up his mind. I wasn't found guilty. I was so happy I almost fell over. My parents and I cried as we hugged tightly outside of court. Although the brother and sister were heavily fined for lying, they never went to jail for it. Since then, I haven't been back to Rome, and I don't plan to ever go back. After all these years, I'd like to use this story to warn anyone thinking about studying abroad. Watch out for people around you, and if someone mugs you, don't go after them. Things could go much worse than what happened to me, and you never know how they will turn out. I've worked in a gun shop for about 15 years. This isn't the life I pictured when I was younger, but it pays the bills, and the routine has made me feel at ease. People come in to ask about shooting gear, guns, or repairs most days, but it's not usually very busy. Every once in a while we get a strange customer, but nothing too out of the ordinary. At least that's what I thought until this one call in 2016. It was just another day. When the phone rang, I was at the counter sorting through some papers. Like always, I picked it up, said the name of the shop, and introduced myself. A man's voice on the other end asked, "Do you sell hunting gear?" Nothing strange about that. That kind of call comes in all the time. "Yes, we do." "How may I assist you?" I replied. Without missing a beat, the man said, "I need thermal clips." He was serious and quick with his words. I paused, taken aback by the request. In all the years I've worked at the shop, I've never heard of thermal clips. It didn't sound like it had anything to do with hunting or guns. That's when I asked, "Who is this?" The man replied instantly, "Commander Shepard." It sounded like a name from a movie or video game, but he continued saying, "I need thermal clips," over and over. I realized this person wasn't serious. It seemed like he was just wasting my time, as we didn't sell anything called thermal clips. I ended the call, thinking it was just a prank from someone with too much free time. Later, to be cautious, I called a friend who was a police officer and told him about the strange call. He listened carefully and then told me something unexpected. In the San Francisco area, similar calls had been reported. Other shops had received calls from someone asking for thermal clips. It seemed like this guy was doing this repeatedly. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I figured it was probably just someone pulling pranks on gun shops. About 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I sighed, really hoping it wasn't the same person. But when I picked up, it was him. He said, "Why the hell did you hang up on me?" in an angry voice. I tried to stay calm, but I was getting more and more irritated. I reported this to the police, I told him, hoping it would scare him off. But instead, he got more intense. "I don't care about your damn police," he spat, his voice growing angrier. I hung up again, hoping he'd get the message this time. The phone rang again. When I picked it up, he spoke in a different tone, saying, "Maybe we can work this out," like he was trying to negotiate. I didn't respond because I didn't know what he was getting at. His tone shifted once more, growing menacing. "I'll cut off your balls and sell them," he said, his voice dripping with venom. His words hit me hard. This was no longer a joke. It had turned into something much darker. I told him firmly that his calls were being tracked and that I would file charges against him if he continued. The phone line remained silent for a moment. Then I heard the faint click of him hanging up. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I couldn't forget how unsettling the call had been, how quickly his voice had gone from calm to terrifying. He never called back, and the shop was quiet for the rest of the day, but I couldn't shake off the strange feeling. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about that call. Who was he, and why was he calling? Was he just a bored prankster, or was he something much darker? I never found out, but I'm grateful the phone didn't ring again that day. Since I work in a gun shop, I'm used to dealing with strange people, but this one was different. Something about him felt deeply wrong, and even after all these years, I still can't quite shake it. My summer camp was in the San Bernardino forest when I was 14. I was there with a group of other teens. 4 of my friends were the oldest and were in charge of the younger girls. There were about 12 of us, and we were going to be there for a week. The first 3 days were great, but on the 4th night, some of the younger girls came running to us, crying because they'd seen something scary in the woods. They told us they had seen a very tall, thin, pale, bald, and humanoid-looking creature staring at them. At first we thought they might just be making it up, but when we saw how scared they looked and how much they were crying, we began to think they might be telling the truth. A lot of them even asked that their tents be moved next to ours because they felt safer with us nearby. That night, they still wouldn't stop crying, so one of my friends went to sleep with them in their tent to make them feel better. My friends and I were so scared that we chose to sleep in the same tent, even though we hadn't seen anything. Even though it seemed silly, we just couldn't fall asleep by ourselves. That same night, we heard loud footsteps around our tent. We tried to ignore it for about 10 minutes, but then we heard a sound that we couldn't describe. Something between choking, grunting, and laughter. It was right on top of our tent. Keep in mind, the tent was only about 6 feet tall. To make that sound on top of it, you'd have to bend over, making you at least 7 feet tall. It just didn't seem likely that someone was playing a joke on us. One more thing. All other sounds from nature seemed to stop during this whole experience. Each of the 3 nights before, we could clearly hear crickets, owls, and even a running stream close to our campground. But for some reason, these noises stopped on this night and every night after that. Strangely, we couldn't hear the stream at night, but as soon as morning came, it would be audible again. The next day, we almost talked about it, but we didn't because we were too scared. As it got dark outside, I felt sick to my stomach, hoping nothing strange would happen that night. I went to the outside toilet before bed and told my friend to wait for me there. I thought I heard breathing at the mesh window, but I was too scared to look. When I got out, my friend told me she'd heard footsteps and the crunch of leaves around the outhouse. We all chose to sleep in the same tent again when we finally got to bed. Luckily, nothing strange happened, but one of my friends did say that around 2 or 3 a.m., she heard a loud, horrible screech coming from near our tent. I believe her, though I didn't hear it myself. The worst night by far was the 6th and final one. 2 of my friends went back to sleep in their tents, but I didn't feel safe doing that, so I stayed in the shared tent with others. That night, everything went well until around midnight. When I woke up, I found myself hunched over my friend's face, staring at her. To be clear, I've never sleepwalked before, and no one in my family has ever done it either. I was confused and creeped out, but I didn't have time to think about it because I heard loud footsteps and a low growling sound going around our tent. I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear. After standing still for a few minutes, I decided to dive under my sleeping bag, cover my ears, and force myself to sleep. My friend, who I had been hunched over earlier, woke up and saw that I wasn't sleeping next to her anymore, and that the tent door was open. She thought I'd gone to the bathroom, so she didn't worry, but I distinctly remember hearing our tent unzip and hearing strange sounds from the other tent where another friend of mine was sleeping. In the morning, when I woke up in my sleeping bag, our tent door was slightly open, even though I was sure I had left it fully closed. We talked to the camp staff about what had happened during the week, and they seemed scared. They said similar things had happened before, but they wouldn't tell us anymore. We also spoke to the group camping next to us, and guess what? They had seen something in the woods that looked exactly like what we saw and had had similar experiences. Since I returned home from camp, I've been hearing whispers of my name in my room, along with bangs, taps, and scratches on my door and walls. I'd never heard these sounds before camp, and I still don't know if they're connected. I still get chills when I think about that night outside my tent and what might have been lurking nearby. It was my first year at Troy University in Alabama, and my dream was to be a part of the college band. Playing the sousaphone, I was thrilled to be co-leader of my section. Being in the band meant everything to me, the music, the friendships, the sense of belonging. But one terrible experience nearly made me quit. During the first week of August, we had band camp, a grueling week of long days and intense practice in the August heat. For the first 4 days, everything went smoothly, but on the 5th day, something happened that I'll never forget. After a long day of practice, we had a night rehearsal scheduled. I finished dinner and headed back to the locker room to grab my instrument. With a little time to spare, I decided to use the restroom. I wasn't in a rush, just going through the motions, feeling the weariness of the day. I was alone in the restroom, which was pretty standard. I shut the stall door and sat down, letting myself unwind for a moment. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a movement on the floor. I froze, my breath catching as I looked more closely. A figure was crawling along the floor, and as my mind registered what I was seeing, I recognized him. He was a guy from the band who played the cymbals, someone I'd seen around but never spoken to. Before I could react, he slid under the stall door, his face twisted into a sick grin, his eyes gleaming with a dark intent. I tried to scream, but fear froze me in place, my voice caught in my throat. He grabbed me with surprising strength, his hands rough and unyielding. In that moment, I felt trapped and helpless. He was pulling at my clothes, his grip bruising my arms. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. Then, just as I was about to give in to panic, I heard the restroom door open. Someone moved quickly toward us. There was a loud banging as they kicked at the stall door, trying to break it open. After 3 strong kicks, the door finally gave way, and one of the graduate assistants from the band stormed in. She didn't hesitate for a second. "Get out of here now," she yelled at him, fury in her voice. "I'm calling the police." He froze, the color draining from his face, and then bolted, running out of the bathroom. The GA turned to me, her voice softening. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. All I could do was shake my head, too shaken to speak. Thanks to her, things didn't go as he had planned. She stayed with me until I calmed down, and we reported the incident. The university took immediate action, and he was removed from the band and faced disciplinary measures. For a while, the memory of that night haunted me, and I nearly gave up on the band. But eventually, with support from friends and family, I managed to move forward. I stayed in the band and learned to love playing again, though I'll never forget that night or the person who saved me. I've worked as a truck driver for a long time. You know what? I'm used to the long roads, the steady hum of the engine, and being alone. It's part of the job to drive at night. I actually find it calming. The empty roads, the peace and quiet, the moonlight lighting the path ahead. But with the quiet and solitude, you can also start to feel a different kind of loneliness, especially when you're hundreds of miles away from anything familiar. You start noticing every little sound, every shadow, and every movement out of the corner of your eye. One night, that stillness turned into something darker. It was nearly midnight, and I was on one of my usual routes, taking back roads through a small town to make a grocery delivery. The radio was playing softly, with bits of chatter and the occasional country song filling the cab. Outside, it was cold enough that I could see my breath fogging the window, even with the heater on. As I came around a bend, my headlights caught sight of something in the distance. There, by the side of the road, a figure stood with an arm raised in the classic hitchhiker's pose. I usually don't pick up strangers, especially this late, but something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe the way he waved, like he was desperate. It was either that or the biting cold that made me stop. I pulled over next to him and he walked to my door. He looked like any other man in his late 30s, wearing a thick jacket and a hat pulled low. In the dim light, I couldn't make out his face clearly, but he smiled politely. "Thanks for stopping, man," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "I've been out here for hours. My car broke down a few miles back." There was a hesitation in my gut, but I ignored it and opened the passenger door. He climbed in and we started down the road. The hum of the engine filled the silence as I tried to focus on the road ahead. "You're a trucker, huh?" he said finally, breaking the quiet. His voice was calm, almost too calm given the situation he'd just described. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my answer short, my eyes on the road. "What are you hauling?" he asked. "Just some groceries," I replied, trying to stay vague. He didn't say anything else after that, but I could feel his eyes on me. Every time I looked out of the corner of my eye, he was watching. The air in the cab felt tense, like something was simmering under the surface. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, he shifted in his seat. "You know, I could use some cash," he said slowly, his tone slightly menacing. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden request. "What?" "I could use some cash, to help me fix my car or something," he repeated, his voice dropping lower, almost threatening. "I don't carry cash on me," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to hide the unease in my voice. Suddenly, his whole demeanor shifted. He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "I wasn't asking," he growled, pulling out a knife. The blade glinted in the dim light of the dashboard. My heart raced. Fear flooded my system, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I told you, I don't have any cash." his face twisted with anger. "Whatever you have, give it to me now," he snarled, his hand tightening around the knife. I knew that if I gave in, he might not stop there. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. With no other choice, I slammed on the brakes. The sudden jolt threw him forward, and he hit his head on the dashboard, dropping the knife in the process. Without thinking, I threw open my door and jumped out, hitting the ground running, my arm bleeding from where he'd cut me. I didn't stop running for what felt like ages. The cold night air stung my lungs as I waved frantically at an approaching car. The driver, an older woman, stopped and immediately called for help. Soon the police arrived. They found the man still inside my truck, dazed from the impact. It turned out he had a record, mostly for small crimes, but they could have easily escalated to something worse. I was taken to the hospital where they stitched up my arm. I was shaken but grateful to be alive. Ever since that night, the open road hasn't felt quite as peaceful. The silence now feels heavier, like something could be lurking in the dark, waiting for another chance. Halloween night has always had a unique vibe, and this year was no different. My friend Alex was having a Halloween party in his family's old house. The place was already creepy, with creaky stairs and dim lights. The decorations were perfect. Cobwebs, pumpkins, and eerie lighting set the mood. But one guest that night would set the tone for the whole event. The party began like any other. People arrived dressed as vampires, witches, clowns, and even a zombie bride. Music played softly in the background, and people laughed and talked. I mingled, had some punch, and admired the creativity in everyone's costumes. Then I saw him. He was standing in the corner, completely still. His costume was simple, almost out of place for a Halloween party. He wore an old suit that looked worn, with creases and fading that made it look like it was from a different era. But it was his mask that drew me in. I had never seen anything like it before. It looked disturbingly real, like someone had peeled off their face and was wearing it as a mask. At first, I thought it was an impressive costume. The mask's lips were thin and the eyes dark and hollow. The longer I looked, though, the worse I felt. The skin looked too lifelike and rough, and I kept waiting for him to blink or move, but he just stood there. People likely thought he was just another guest staying in character. As the night wore on, something felt off. He didn't laugh, talk, or even touch the food or drinks. He stayed in that corner just watching. I pointed him out to Alex, who shrugged it off, saying, "Probably someone messing around." But I saw the hint of worry in his eyes. As the party started to wind down and guests left, only a few of us close friends remained. That's when I noticed he had moved. He was no longer in the corner, but standing by the door, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something. Alex finally made up his mind to confront him. "Hey man, your costume is cool, but the party's over. Who are you?" he asked, his tone trying to stay light. There was no answer. The man didn't even look at him. Alex reached out as if to remove the mask, but as soon as he touched it, he pulled his hand back, looking horrified. It's stuck," he said, his voice full of shock. We all gathered around, concerned. One by one we tried to pull the mask off, but it wouldn't budge. It felt warm, like real skin. Panic set in as we realized the mask wasn't just a costume. It was as if it had become a part of him. Then the man's hand moved. He reached out, placed his hand on Alex's arm and squeezed. We felt dread creeping in. Alex's voice trembled. "We need to get him out of here," he said. But the masked man slowly turned and walked out the door without a word. We all felt a strange sense of relief when he left. The next day I dug through old news stories at the library. That's when I found it, a series of murders from years ago. The killer wore a mask made from his victim's skin and was last seen on Halloween night before disappearing without a trace. The mask in the news looked exactly like the one I had seen the night before. Alex and I went to the police, but they dismissed it as a Halloween prank. We knew what we saw. That mask wasn't just for fun, it was something far worse. A few days later, Alex began to act strangely. He stopped answering his phone, didn't show up for work, and wouldn't let me in when I visited. When I finally saw him, his eyes were dark and he moved with a strange, slow deliberation. He didn't speak. It was as if the mask had somehow infected him, changing him. I haven't seen him since, but sometimes late at night, I think about that Halloween party and wonder if that masked figure still roams on Halloween seeking out someone new.